What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So the time has finally come to break down Dricus versus Khamzat. And this is a fight that I've gone back and forth on. I think most people have gone back and forth on. But I have picked a winner. Wait till the end to hear it. But I think there's a few things about, not just this matchup, but like about these fighters themselves that people are sort of overlooking or not truly realizing about them. And honestly, I think that's more to do with Dricus. I think people are treating Khamzat like he's more of the unknown commodity, that we just haven't seen him enough. We haven't seen him, in enough fights that like have gone the distance or have pushed him in certain ways and yada, yada, yada. But I actually think we know pretty much who Khamzat is. There's an X factor I'll get into that most people are, overlooking, but I'll get to that later. But I think Dricus is the much more like enigmatic person to me, because he's like ultimately a paradox. Because on the one hand, we all know that he's sloppy. We've all seen the Homer Simpson video. Most of us, when he was on the come up, were mocking him, myself included. Most of us did not think he had a fucking shot against Robert Whittaker. And then after that fight, we had to rethink things. And then we were still like, but can he do this to Israel Adesanya? And then of course he does. So like on the one hand, it's easy to dismiss him, and I think we might still be right in doing so, because I think there's a bit of fool's gold in his championship run. So like I'm seeing people claim that Dricus is now the middleweight GOAT, and I'm seeing them even put him like top 20 in their GOAT list, top 15 in their GOAT lists. And I think that's just wildly off the mark. And if you look at it, all of his good wins, from Whittaker onward, are against guys who are past their prime. Okay? They simply are. Like, Robert Whittaker, he was only 32 when Dricus beat him, but he had been fighting for, I checked, it was 14 or 15 years already. He'd had over 30 fights. He'd won the belt 6 years prior. Like, that is just not a guy who's in his prime anymore. The wear and tear, the time in the game, the stress, all of that is not a guy in his prime anymore. He's not washed, okay? Like, people speak like it's binary, like you're either in your prime or you're completely washed, when in reality, there's typically a gradual decline from absolute fucking peak prime to Tony Ferguson washed, And Ferguson's a bad example because he did just plummet off a cliff. But even with Tony, you could see the decline start to happen during his wins. Like, if you were watching, you saw that the RDA fight was his peak, and you saw in the Kevin Lee fight, in the Anthony Pettis fight, in the Donald Cerrone fight, you saw that he was starting to do worse against those guys. And in each fight, it was against an easier opponent, and he still was starting to look worse and worse and worse. So you could kind of see it coming ahead of time. Same thing with Fedor Emelianenko. Like, the end of his prime is clearly the Tim Sylvia fight, and then you watch him go on to knock out Andrei Arlovsky and Brett Rogers, but you can see that he's already doing worse. You know what I mean? Like, there's typically a gradual drop-off. And Robert Whittaker was not washed by any means when Dricus beat him, but that's not peak Robert Whittaker. And similarly, like, even Sean Strickland, like, Strickland was 33 and 34 in their two fights. He'd already been fighting for, like, 16 or 17 years in each of those fights. He'd had over 30 fights. Like, he'd been around for a long fucking time, and we know he trains like a moron. Like, we know he takes shitloads of damage in the gym. Like, he might have been at the height of his career because he finally won the belt, but he's not, like, in his prime. You know what I mean? And same thing with Adesanya. Adesanya was 35 when Dricus beat him. Like, people have made videos about how we can just see that Adesanya's speed isn't the same as what it used to be, that his reflexes aren't the same as what they used to be, And that's pretty old in the fight game, 35. Like, we all know the famous, statistic about how rare it is for champions 35 and up to win in title fights. And, especially in the lower weight classes. And granted, this is middleweight, but like, Adesanya at that age, he'd had almost 30 fights, and he'd had 80 kickboxing fights. He'd had a whole kickboxing career. This is not a guy in his prime. And so, that's not to say Dricus sucks or that these aren't great wins, because those are still top-ranked dudes and former champions, and when he beat Strickland, an active sitting champion. So these are still great wins. It's not to say these don't count or something, but they're not wins over prime dudes. So there's, again, a bit of fool's gold there. And any GOAT discussion is very premature, but it kind of, it makes you wonder if this one possibility for Dricus is true. The possibility that he is an overachieving, sloppy action fighter. Because we've seen this many times. Like, we've seen countless action fighters from regional promotions come to the UFC, and they typically don't do that well. Like, sometimes they make it to a title shot, and they lose. Like, that's the typical story. And often they don't even make it to a title shot. Look at Eric Silva, look at Thomas Almeida, look at those guys. But the more known people, you know, and people who are champions in previous organizations, you know, who come over, they typically don't win belts. Like, look at Kaya Sakura, look at Michael Chandler, you know. Sometimes they do win a belt, but they are almost never reigning champions who like stick around for years and years and have a bunch of defenses. Like, look at Eddie Alvarez, you know, he comes in, loses his debut against Cerrone, has a couple of really dicey wins over Melendez and Pettis, beats RDA, and then immediately loses to McGregor. And look at Jiri Prohaska. Like, he comes in, he beats an old man version of Glover Teixeira and is like kind of losing that fight until he wins it at the end, and then has to vacate because he's injured, and then goes on to lose twice to Alex. And so of like the people I've listed, Dricus has actually had the most success, because not only has he won the belt, but he's actually defended it twice. But he is still of that mold. He is still a wild action fighter from the regional scene who's like come over to the UFC. And again, like I just said, like his championship run, the names look great and the finishes are great. You know, he didn't finish Strickland, but the finishes over Whitaker and Adesanya are fantastic. But again, there's a bit of fool's gold there because those guys were not in their primes. That's one side of the equation. The other side, and this is where Dricus is such a paradox, is I'd argue, and I've not heard anyone say this, like I've heard people say that Dricus is way more skilled than people give him credit for, and they've broken down his striking and showed how his kicks are actually really good and how his grappling is actually pretty good, his submissions are good, etc. I've not heard anyone point this out, which is that in my mind, Dricus kind of represents, like in a broad philosophical sense, in a strategic sense, in terms of his approach, he actually represents kind of the perfect fighter to me, because he's sort of like a mix between Bas Rutten's approach to striking and Khabib's approach to grappling. And what I mean by that is, like, he is an aggressive fighter for, you know, like he's also a good game planner. So he'll, you know, we've seen that. Like, he's a good adapter. His team game plans well. Coming out southpaw and jabbing with Whitaker is a great thing. Like, we've seen that against certain dangerous people, he won't just recklessly like blitz at them as much. Like, he'll pace himself a little more, he'll keep the distance a little better, use his kicks more. Like, he's a good adaptive fighter, and that's another reason why that's another reason to be optimistic about his prospects and to say, no, this isn't all fool's gold. He isn't just some action fighter who's kind of lucked his way into a title reign. You know, he is a smart fighter, his team is a smart team. But in general, he's a pressure fighter. In general, he's an aggressive, come-at-you fighter, and I think that's good. I think in the grappling, like, that's why I compare it to Khabib. Like, he is a guy who will take you down, and he is aggressive on the ground. He's aggressively seeking dominant position. He's aggressively using ground and pound. He's trying to hurt you. He's aggressive with his submission attempts, and that mix of the takedown, the control, the ground and pound, the submissions, that all plays off each other to make him very fucking menacing on the ground. And we've seen that against guys like Darren Till and Israel Adesanya. As far as the striking, like, Dricus is sloppy as hell, but he kind of fights like I think a striker should in MMA. Because I think MMA is ultimately the striking in MMA, and this would be a good topic for a separate video that I might make, but like the striking in MMA I think is gradually gonna funnel itself into looking more like kickboxing. Because in kickboxing there's kind of three main archetypes that work. Being an aggressive pressure fighter, being an aggressive counterpuncher, and being a sort of boxer-puncher, all-terrain, jack-of-all-trades kind of fighter. What we don't see a lot of in kickboxing are sort of low-volume snipers, so people like, kind of like how Israel Adesanya fought in his MMA career, how Darren Till fights, how Leon Edwards fights. Like, those kinds of people don't tend to succeed at the highest level of kickboxing. We also don't see like low volume counter punchers who just kind of sit there and wait for you to make the first move in a counter. So like the Lyoto Machida kind of counter puncher. We don't see guys like that have a lot of success in kickboxing. And even like low volume defensive fighters that you see in other sports like boxing, like a Floyd Mayweather type low volume defensive fighter doesn't tend to do well in kickboxing, because in boxing, you're not allowed to kick their fucking legs, and the back is an illegal target, so you can just turn sideways and shell up, and that's a lot more viable. In kickboxing, not so much. And all that is to say, like, I think MMA is going to slowly progress in that direction. I don't think it's going to look exactly like kickboxing, because it's a different sport, and the range is different, and the takedowns are there, and etc. But, like, the broad archetypes, I think, are going to move in that direction. And Dricus does take that approach. Like, Dricus is an aggressive striker. Like, he will feint. It's awkward, but he will feint. He will jab. He's got a high guard that he always defaults to. He throws in combinations. He throws power shot combinations. He throws combinations with his punches and his kicks involved. Like, he'll throw kind of herding strikes to kind of to kind of herd you up against the fence so he can, do damage. Like, he's an effective pressure kickboxer, And so, again, you take that, you take the grappling, you've got this sort of Bas Rutten Khabib hybrid approach. And to me, that's like a good example of, one of the top possible archetypes a fighter can be. Now, what makes it, what makes it funny is that it's like a horrible, ugly, technically flawed version of that. It's sort of like the worst version you could possibly imagine of that, but it is still that approach. And I think that is largely what gives people so much problems, is someone like that, and especially when he's durable, when he's got a good gas tank, when he hits hard, when he's strong, when he's like relentless, like that's just really, really hard to deal with. And that, that might separate him from some of these action fighters from the regional scenes that I brought up previously. Like that, the same is not true about Jiri Prochazka. Jiri Prochazka is not that kind of archetype. You know what I mean? And Dricus also has, like, people talk about like his tenacity and how he has a sort of never quit attitude and he'll push through being tired and stuff like that. But I don't think people like are truly appreciating what a factor that is and how unique it is, because it makes me think of Chael Sonnen's definition of a tough guy. He said that like an ultimate tough guy is someone who is always trying to win. If they're down by 100 points, they're trying to be down by 99. If they're up by 100 points, they're trying to be up by 101. Like, they're just always pushing. They're always trying to win. And that's pretty rare to see in a fighter. Like, most good fighters are tough people, and there's different ways to be tough. Like, tough might be being willing to take a shot, being willing to like trade and be in a war and stuff like that. But not all fighters, like even tough, gnarly fighters like Robbie Lawler, like Robbie Lawler, you could see him get frustrated. You could see, like, when he gets taken down in the first Johnny Hendricks fight, when he gets taken down in the 5th round, you can just see the frustration, like, this fucking guy is going to wrestle me again. Like, I'm stuck here. Like, you can just see a sort of, not that he quit, not that he gave up, but you could see a little bit of that. You could see that there was a way to fight him that would frustrate him in such a way that it would not lead to him just constantly trying to win, just constantly trying to beat you. Whereas someone like Dricus is in that truly elite company, I think, that sort of Chael Sonnen definition of a tough guy, the guy who's always trying to win, whether he's up by 100 or down by 100, he's just always trying. Because that's only a few fighters. That's Kamaru Usman, that's Dominic Cruz, that's Alexander Volkanovski, that's Alexandre Pantoja, that's Michael Bisping, like Frankie Edgar, like those kinds of fighters are rare. And I think Dricus is one of those guys. Like, Dricus can be in any spot, whether he's ahead, whether he's down, whatever, and he's just trying. And that counts. So that you take the fact that he's got a good gas tank, he's strong, he hits hard, you take the fact that his team game plans well. You take the fact that even though he's sloppy as fuck, like, he actually, as an archetype, as a kind of fighter, represents one of the ideal archetypes for an MMA fighter. You combine all that, and all of a sudden, he does seem like he could have the makings of a true all-time great in him. So, I'm very torn about him. He is a paradox to me. Like, again, on the one hand, he's this sort of overperforming, sloppy ass regional action fighter. On the other hand, he's GOAT material. You know what I mean? So, and I'm just not 100% sure how that's going to play out as far as when he has to fight Khamzat, when he has to fight Ivanov, when he has to fight Fluffy Hernandez. Like, I'm not 100% sure how that's going to go down. And if he can beat all those guys, then, you know, then middleweight GOAT discussion, like all-time GOAT rankings, that starts to come into play. With Khamzat, I feel like he's a much more known commodity because we just have seen it. Like, we have seen him go the distance twice. Like, we've seen what happens when he doesn't want to grapple with a guy in the Gilbert Burns fight. We've seen what happens when he gasses out and just, like, coasts for 2 rounds against Kamaru Usman. We've seen what happens when he gets hurt, when he gets dropped. And some of what we've seen is good. Like, when he goes up against a guy he doesn't want to grapple, he doesn't just fall apart. And when he gets hurt with strikes, he doesn't just fall apart. It's kind of like I was saying a minute ago, like, there's different kinds of toughness. And he's shown a sort of fighter's toughness, a willingness to take damage, a willingness to trade, a willingness to be in a war. But he hasn't shown the kind of toughness that Dricus has shown and that Edgar and Cruz and Volkanovski and all the guys I listed have shown, and Usman himself, because just look at the Usman fight. You have an old man Usman going up a weight class on short notice, and he's the one who just endures this horrible first round beating, you know, and mauling. And he's the one who stays tough, stays disciplined, stays in the fucking fight, and probably wins rounds 2 and 3. And Khamzat's the one who's like, oh shit, I'm tired. Oh, maybe my hands hurt, whatever. And just kind of coasts and, like, arguably loses. And that's just not a guy who's trying to win constantly. That's not a Chael Sonnen definition of a tough guy. Just isn't. And, like, I see no reason to think Khamzat's going to change his fighting style. I think he is, you know, like, he is like a Conor McGregor. He is like a Ronda Rousey. Like, he is that kind of guy. He comes out hot, he finishes most people, and sometimes he can't. And sometimes that's, like, that has the potential to just make him implode in certain fights. You know, like McGregor did against Diaz in the first fight, or like Rousey did against Holly Holm. Like, it has the potential for that to happen, but it also has the potential to be like a back and forth war, like McGregor in the Diaz rematch, or like when, like, Luke Thomas said this fight could be like Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua 1, where Henderson wins the first 3 rounds, gets tired, loses the last 2, but it was still a great war, and Henderson still won. So Khamzat could do that here. Khamzat could beat the shit out of Dricus for a couple rounds, get tired, maybe get a second win in the 4th, and, like, win a dicey decision. Like, that's a possibility. But I don't think he's going to fight differently. And now, the nearest to fighting differently that he might do is what, like, I saw MMA Che did some good videos breaking down the Whitaker fight and kind of arguing that Khamzat was adjusting his style in a way where he was kind of making Whitaker do more of the work. He was making Whitaker carry him more. He was exerting still a lot of energy himself, but doing it in a way where it guaranteed Whitaker had to exert even more energy. And that's, like, a viable way to, like, apply that sort of pressure grappling over a longer fight, because it doesn't matter if you're tired as long as the other person is even more tired. You know, like, even Khabib kind of did that. So there's room for that, but I don't think Khamzat is gonna suddenly become like a measured fighter, a fighter who, you know, I don't think he's ever gonna be an Islam Makhachev. You know, yeah, I mean, like, I just can't see that transformation happening. I just don't think it's in his personality, and I think we've just seen enough fights from him where, like, I just doubt that will happen. The big factor, and I've made videos about this, and I've gotten shit for this, is that I'm pretty sure Khamzat is just on EPO now. I think the evidence for that is pretty strong. And I think that doesn't mean he can just do what he's been doing for 5 rounds straight, because even on EPO, I don't think you can push as hard as he pushed in, like, the Kevin Holland fight or the Li Jingliang fight. I don't think even on EPO you can do that for 25 minutes. But that can mean that he can do that for maybe 2.5 rounds instead of 1.5 rounds. You know what I'm saying? So, like, with that all said, like, and with that EPO factor involved, like, I am leaning towards Khamzat. Like, I think his finishing ability is overstated, and this is another, I'll shout out MMHA again, but I think he did a good job pointing out how Khamzat's submission ability is actually not that good. And I think you can see it. It's pretty obvious. Like, whether it's the Darce over Holland, whether it's like the rear naked chokes he's gotten, like he's getting these more because of the pressure and less because of the actual jiu-jitsu skill. So, and I get it, he's a good grappler, he's a well-rounded grappler. Like, the video of him doing a jiu-jitsu like sparring match with Luke Rockhold is impressive. But when you're watching these setups and you're watching how he's getting these, he's getting them because he's ragdolling the person. They're trying to escape the holds, they're trying to escape the rides, the pins. He's landing ground and pound shots, and he's just frantically like digging for these chokes. And when you have to think about all that, and it's just coming and coming and coming relentlessly, like, that's where at some point the hand gets under the neck. At some point they're busy trying to get this hook out, they're busy trying to block this punch, whatever, and then boom, the hand gets under the chin. That is just different than someone like Demian Maia, like, who's an actual expert back taker from different positions, expert at retaining the back, regaining the back after you lose it, and has a very systematic approach to hand fighting, to setting up the rear naked choke. Doesn't need a lot of ground and pound to do it. Doesn't need a relentless pace to do it. Like, Demian Maia, like, that's that level of jiu-jitsu. That's that level of submission threat. Khamzat doesn't have that. It might be effective, and it might lead to, like, he might submit Dricus du Plessis with a rear naked choke, or Demian Maia might not submit Dricus du Plessis. But nevertheless, like, there's reason to have appropriate skepticism of Khamzat's submissions. With that all said, with all of this, is Dricus, with his mental toughness, with his broad approach to fighting, with his intelligent game plans, like, is he GOAT material, yada yada. With all that said, and with everything we've just said about how Khamzat's not going to change his style, how he will get tired, he just is a McGregor, he is a Rousey, his submissions aren't actually that great. With all of that said, I am picking Khamzat. I do think that he will I think it's more likely that he either just, like, takes Dricus out early, first round, second round, and possibly, like, it goes late, but he wins a dicey decision, again, like a McGregor DS2 kind of decision. I think those combined possibilities are more likely than the possibility that Dricus just weathers the storm and wins the decision or gets a late finish. Like, I ultimately think that if I had to pick one outcome that's most likely, it is that Khamzat will be too much. That, with the EPO, which people can hate on that, I'm not against fighters taking performance-enhancing drugs. I think they should all take them. I think it should be allowed. I think organizations like Pride, where it was allowed, were better. I think Dricus is probably on stuff too, just look at his physique. It's just less of a factor because if he is on it, he's probably been on it for a while, whereas with Khamzat, I suspect he's only been on it for, like, his last 2 fights. So it's more of like a new X factor in the matchup. But this isn't me hating on Khamzat. I hope he is on EPO. It'll make his fucking fights funner. But I'm saying that between like Khamzat's wrestling is looking all the more dialed in. He's training with the Russian team. The footage of him training looks nuts. Like, he's going to be as sharp as he's ever been, I suspect. And I just don't think Dricus has what it takes to stop it. And I think there's a good chance it leads to a relatively early finish.